The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of a small-town diner, casting warm streaks of light across the checkered floor. The place smelled of freshly brewed coffee, butter sizzling on the griddle, and the sweetness of pies cooling on the counter. It was the kind of diner where everyone knew each other, where regulars sat in their favorite booths, and where the hard-working staff always wore tired but genuine smiles. At the center of it all was a young black waitress, her uniform a little faded from years of washing, her hands calloused from endless shifts, yet her spirit shining through her gentle eyes. She carried plates with grace, exchanged warm greetings, and somehow found the energy to smile even when exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. But the calm rhythm of the diner was about to be broken. The doorbell jingled, and into the diner walked a man who didn't belong. His polished shoes clicked against the floor with each arrogant step. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, a gold watch glittering under the neon lights, and dark glasses perched on his face even though the sun had already begun to set. He walked not with humility, but with the entitled swagger of someone used to people stepping out of his way. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even the cook in the back peeked out for a moment, sensing trouble. This was not just any customer, this was a millionaire who believed his wealth gave him ownership of every room he entered. He glanced around with disgust, his lip curling as though the very air inside the diner offended him. The chairs, the tables, the customers enjoying their modest meals, it was all beneath him. The waitress approached with her notepad, speaking in the same polite tone she used for every guest. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. Please, have a seat. What can I get for you today?" Her voice was steady, respectful, though inside she already felt the storm brewing. The millionaire dropped his leather briefcase onto the booth with a loud thud, making sure everyone noticed. He sat down heavily and leaned back as if claiming the entire space as his throne. Then his voice, loud and commanding, filled the diner. "Well, this is where I ended up? A dump. And this is who's serving me?" The words sliced through the chatter like a knife. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations froze. A few customers exchanged uneasy glances, waiting to see what would happen next. The waitress didn't flinch. She had faced rude customers before. She had faced worse than rudeness in her life. With quiet dignity, she lifted her pen and asked again, "What can I get for you, sir?" Her calmness only fueled his arrogance. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with mockery, and raised his voice deliberately so every person in the diner could hear. "Don't expect a big tip unless you move faster than a snail. Do you even know how to carry a tray without spilling it all over me? Or is that too complicated?" A group of young men in the corner chuckled, encouraged by his cruelty. The sound of their laughter echoed uncomfortably through the diner, making the silence from everyone else even heavier. The waitress said nothing, her face an unreadable mask. She wrote his order swiftly, turned, and walked toward the counter. Her steps were steady, though inside her hands trembled slightly. But her silence wasn't weakness, it was a strength the millionaire would never understand. Minutes later, she returned with a glass of water, placing it carefully in front of him. He lifted it, sniffed at it with disdain, and then set it down forcefully. "Tap water?" His voice dripped with insult. "Do you even know who I am? I don't drink what peasants drink. Bring me bottled water. Imported. Expensive. Assuming you even know how to spell the brand." His laugh rang through the room, bouncing off the walls. This time, fewer people laughed along. Most just looked down at their plates, unwilling to make eye contact. The waitress replaced the glass with a bottle, setting it gently in front of him. Again, she said nothing. And again, her silence unsettled him. He smirked, scanning her from head to toe. Then, pointing at her uniform, he continued. "And look at this wrinkled, faded, pathetic. Did you borrow that uniform from a thrift shop? No wonder you're stuck here, serving pancakes to nobodies. People like you never make it anywhere in life." The room was suffocating in its silence. The air itself seemed to grow heavier with every insult he spat. A woman at a nearby table whispered angrily under her breath. An elderly man shook his head, muttering that some people had no manners. But no one spoke up loud enough to challenge the millionaire. Money, after all, has a way of silencing courage. The waitress lowered her gaze for a moment, not out of shame, but out of patience. She had learned that battles weren't always won with shouting. Sometimes, battles were won with truth. She adjusted her sleeve as she reached across the table, and for just a second, the edge of a tattoo peeked through. It was only a glimpse, but it carried weight. A few customers noticed. Their eyes lingered on her arm, curiosity sparking, sensing that there was more to her story than her uniform and tired smile revealed. But the millionaire didn't notice. He was too busy entertaining himself, too drunk on the sound of his own voice. He picked at his food, sneering at it. This is what passes for cooking in a place like this? No wonder people like you end up here, forgotten, invisible. Minimum wage, no future, no respect. His words were like poison, dripping louder with each sentence. He wanted her to break, to snap, to give him the satisfaction of anger. But she refused. She continued serving, steady, calm, and unshaken on the surface. Inside, though, she carried a story. A story deeper than this man's arrogance could ever reach. A story inked permanently into her skin. That tattoo, hidden beneath her sleeve, was more than art. It was a memory, a sacrifice, a symbol of love and pain and survival. It was a story of her father, a man who had once fought for the very freedom this millionaire took for granted. A man who had given his life for people he would never even meet. A man whose daughter now stood here, enduring insult after insult, waiting for the moment when truth would silence cruelty. The insults kept coming. The millionaire bragged about his cars, his mansions, the parties he attended where ordinary people would never be allowed inside. He mocked not just her, but the other customers too, laughing at their simple meals, their modest clothes, their ordinary lives. The diner's walls seemed to close in with every arrogant word. Some customers clenched their fists. Some whispered angrily to each other. But no one yet dared to stand. And through it all, the waitress kept moving, plate after plate, step after step, holding herself with quiet dignity. Her silence spoke louder than his insults. And though the millionaire didn't know it yet, the balance of power was slowly shifting. The more he mocked her, the more people began to look at her, not with pity, but with respect. And soon, when the truth inked on her skin would finally be revealed, respect would turn into awe, and the millionaire's laughter would vanish into silence. The diner had never felt so heavy. Normally, the clatter of silverware and the laughter of regulars filled the space with warmth, but now it was as if a storm cloud had moved inside. The millionaire sat at his booth like a king sneering at peasants, his eyes roaming the room with contempt. Every sound he made, every arrogant laugh, every careless insult, filled the air and left it sour. He leaned back in the booth, one arm stretched arrogantly across the top, tapping his gold watch as if it were a weapon, reminding everyone that he was rich, powerful, and untouchable. "Look at all of you," he said in a booming voice, loud enough for every ear to hear. His gaze swept over the farmers in dusty boots, the tired mothers feeding their children, the truckers sipping hot coffee before another long shift. "Is this what life is for you? Sitting in this little hole, eating cheap food, pretending you matter? While you waste your hours here, I'm out there buying companies, controlling markets, living a life you can't even dream of." He laughed cruelly, as if the thought of ordinary people living ordinary lives was the funniest joke in the world. No one responded. Some bowed their heads lower into their plates, some clenched their fists under the table, but no one dared to speak out loud. The silence of the diner was like a shield protecting the waitress, though it did little to stop the sting of his words. She moved quietly between tables, pouring coffee, refilling water, clearing plates, all while he continued to tear into her dignity. Her uniform was wrinkled, yes, her shoes were worn, yes, but every step she took carried a quiet grace that no amount of money could buy. When she returned to his table with his order, he made sure to make a show of his disgust. He picked up the fork, poked the food as though it were poisoned, and shook his head in mock pity. This is the best you can do? My dogs eat better meals. Do you even taste this before you serve it, or do you just scrape it off the floor and throw it onto a plate?" He pushed it aside dramatically, the fork clattering onto the table. "You should be ashamed. Serving trash food in a trash diner, wearing trash clothes. Honestly, why do you even bother? The words echoed in the silence, bouncing around until they found a place to sting. The waitress stood still, her tray balanced in her hands, her face unreadable. She had heard cruel words before too many times, but the way he said them, the way he seemed to enjoy her humiliation, dug deeper. Still, she refused to give him what he wanted. She turned calmly, walking to another table with steady steps, her silence louder than his shouting. But his arrogance only grew. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his voice dropping to a mocking tone that still carried across the diner. "Tell me something, girl," he said, his lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Do you dream? Do you ever imagine yourself escaping this place, or have you accepted your fate? Born poor, die poor, that's the curse, isn't it? You'll never know what it's like to live in a mansion, to drive a car worth more than this entire diner. People like you are background noise. People like me, we're history. We're remembered. Our names are written in the books. Yours?" He snapped his fingers sharply, the sound making a few customers flinch. "Forgotten. Erased. Gone the second you leave this earth." The waitress paused at a booth nearby, setting down a steaming cup of coffee for an elderly couple. Her hands trembled just slightly, but her face remained composed. Inside, however, his words scraped against old wounds she carried deep in her chest. She thought of her father, of his broad shoulders and steady voice, of the stories he used to tell when she was a child. She thought of the night she learned he would never come home again, the night her world collapsed and she was forced to grow up too fast. She thought of the tattoo she had inked into her arm, the one hidden beneath her sleeve, carved into her skin as a promise never to forget. Forgotten? Never. Not while she breathed. Not while her father's story lived inside her. But the millionaire kept talking, blind to the storm quietly gathering in the room. He waved his hand in the air as if dismissing everyone around him. "You all pretend you're happy, but you're not. You envy me. You want my life, my wealth, my power. But you can't have it. You'll never have it. That's the difference between us. I was born to rule, and you were born to serve. That's the order of the world." He leaned back smugly, sipping his imported water, satisfied with his own performance. The diner, however, was no longer on his side. The customers who had once avoided his gaze were now watching him with narrowed eyes, their silence turning from fear to anger. A trucker clenched his coffee mug so tightly his knuckles went white. A young mother pressed her child close, whispering that some people had no manners. And more than a few pairs of eyes had noticed the faint mark on the waitress's arm when her sleeve shifted. They leaned forward in curiosity, whispering softly to one another. "Did you see that? There's a tattoo. What is it?" The waitress bent to wipe a spill at one table, and this time her sleeve slipped higher. More of the tattoo was visible: bold lines, sharp edges, a symbol that seemed to carry weight. A woman gasped softly, covering her mouth. An older man squinted, his eyes widening as recognition dawned. "That's not just a design," he murmured. "That looks like a military emblem." But before anyone could speak louder, the millionaire's voice thundered again, dragging attention back to himself. "Don't think I don't see you all staring at her. What, you think she's special? She's not. She's nothing more than a servant. A waitress in a dirty uniform, carrying food that isn't worth the plates it's served on. And yet, somehow, you look at her as though she's important. She's not. I am. I'm the only one in this room who matters. Me, and no one else." He slammed his hand on the table with such force that the plates rattled, and several people jumped in their seats. For the first time, the waitress turned and looked at him directly. Her eyes met his, calm, steady, unwavering. There was no fear, no shame, only a quiet strength that made his smirk falter for just a moment. The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if the entire diner was holding its breath, waiting, sensing that something bigger than insults was building in the air. The millionaire shifted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable under her gaze, but quickly masked it with another sneer. He didn't know it yet, but his downfall had already begun. The waitress's silence had become more powerful than his shouting. And the story hidden beneath her sleeve, carved into her very skin, was the storm waiting to break, and when it did, the entire diner would never forget. The diner was no longer just a small roadside stop where people came for coffee and pie. In that moment, it had become a stage, a place where silence carried more power than shouting. The millionaire, sitting in his polished suit and shining watch, still thought he held control, but the truth was already slipping from his grip. The hush in the room wasn't because people feared him anymore, it was because they sensed something was coming. Something bigger than his arrogance, something that would leave a mark on every soul present. The waitress stood by his booth, tray balanced carefully in her hands. Her face was calm, but inside her heart pounded like a drum. She could feel every eye on her. She could feel the heavy weight of curiosity pressing against her sleeve where the faint lines of her tattoo peeked out. She knew the secret she carried was no longer hers alone, pieces of it had already been seen, guessed, whispered about. The question wasn't if it would be revealed, but when. The millionaire leaned forward with his mocking smirk, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's this?" he said, pointing toward her arm. "A little drawing to make you feel special? Did you pick it up on discount at some back alley shop? Do you think a few scribbles make you more than a waitress?" His laughter was sharp, a sound meant to wound. "It's pathetic. Ink doesn't change who you are. You'll never be more than a servant in this dump." But as the sleeve slipped further up, the reaction wasn't laughter. It was shock. One by one, the customers froze in place. Forks hovered halfway to mouths, coffee mugs were set down with trembling hands, conversations fell into silence. The ink was no ordinary tattoo. It wasn't random lines or pretty patterns. It was deliberate, bold, heavy with meaning. A crest. An insignia. A mark that carried with it stories of sacrifice, courage, and loss. A murmur spread through the diner like a wave. A man in his 50s leaned forward, squinting at the design. "I've seen that before," he whispered to his wife, his voice tight with memory. A young woman at the counter gasped softly, covering her mouth. "Is that? No, it can't be." An older gentleman in the back, quiet until now, rose shakily to his feet. His eyes widened, his lips trembling. "That mark," he said in a voice hoarse with emotion. "That's the insignia of the 121st Division. The division that marched into fire, and never came back." The room stilled again. Even the clinking of dishes in the kitchen stopped. The words hung in the air like thunder, echoing in every corner of the diner. The waitress froze, her tray heavy in her hands. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes closed, just briefly, as if fighting a flood of memories too painful to hold back. She remembered long nights of waiting by the window as a little girl, hoping to see her father's familiar stride coming up the path. She remembered the folded flag handed to her trembling hands instead of his embrace. She remembered her mother's tears, her siblings' cries, the silence in the house that followed. And she remembered the day she inked his division's insignia into her skin, not as decoration, but as a promise to never let his name, his sacrifice, or his memory fade into nothing. She opened her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but unshakable. "You don't know me," she said, her words carrying across the diner like a quiet bell. "You don't know what I've lived through. You don't know the nights I prayed for news that never came, the mornings I woke up to silence instead of his voice. You don't know what it's like to lose the strongest person in your life and to keep living as if the world didn't just collapse." The millionaire shifted uncomfortably, but still forced a smirk. "So what? Everyone loses someone. That doesn't make you special." He leaned back with mock arrogance. "And it certainly doesn't make you worthy of respect." Her eyes hardened. She pulled her sleeve higher, revealing more of the tattoo. The gasps grew louder. Now the symbol was undeniable. The bold lines, the unmistakable crest, it was a soldier's mark, carved in memory and love. Tears filled the eyes of strangers who understood what it meant, even if they didn't know her personally. A woman near the counter pressed a napkin to her mouth to stifle a sob. A trucker lowered his head, whispering a quiet prayer. Even the young men who had laughed earlier stared with wide eyes, shame creeping across their faces. "This isn't just a tattoo," the waitress said, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "This is my father. This is his story etched into my skin. He was part of the 121st. He fought for this country. He fought for freedom, for people he didn't even know. And he never came home." Her voice cracked for a moment, but she swallowed it down, standing taller. "Every morning, I wake up and remember that sacrifice. Every day, I carry his memory. And every night, when I see this mark, I remind myself that my pain isn't weakness. It's strength. It's the reminder that love and sacrifice are worth more than all the money in the world." The diner was silent, but it was not empty silence. It was full of emotion, full of respect, full of hearts breaking together. People who had never met her father felt his presence through her words. They saw him in her strength, in her pain, in her refusal to let arrogance crush dignity. The millionaire opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He shifted in his seat, the weight of dozens of eyes crushing him. His suit, his watch, his money, they were powerless against the truth standing before him. For the first time, he wasn't the center of the room. For the first time, no one cared about his wealth. The waitress stepped closer, her voice stronger now, resonating with conviction. "You look at me and see nothing. But I carry everything. I carry my father's sacrifice. I carry his love. I carry the weight of a story written in blood, in courage, in the tears of a little girl who grew up without him. You think power is measured by money. But real power is measured by sacrifice. My father gave everything. And you," she pointed, her voice like a blade, "you have given nothing but cruelty." Gasps rippled again through the crowd. The millionaire flinched under her words as if they were strikes. The arrogance in his eyes faltered, replaced with a flicker of doubt. His smirk twitched, then fell. His hand moved instinctively to adjust his watch, but even the gold seemed dull under the weight of the moment. Then she did what no one expected, she rolled her sleeve all the way up, exposing the tattoo in its entirety. The full insignia of the 121st Division, carved permanently into her arm. The room erupted, not in sound, but in feeling. A collective gasp. Tears. Reverence. Every person in the diner knew they were witnessing something that would stay with them forever. The old man in the back sank back into his chair, covering his face with trembling hands as tears streamed down his cheeks. The young mother at the corner hugged her child tightly, whispering about bravery and honor. The trucker pressed a hand to his chest, eyes closed, as if saluting silently. And in the middle of it all, the millionaire sat frozen, stripped of the one thing he thought made him powerful, respect. Because respect cannot be bought. It is earned. And in that diner, in that moment, every ounce of respect belonged not to him, but to the waitress who carried her father's story in her blood and in her skin. The diner would never forget the silence of that moment, the shock of that reveal, the tears that followed. It was no longer about food, or service, or insults. It was about truth, sacrifice, and dignity standing taller than arrogance could ever reach. The diner felt like a cathedral of silence after the tattoo was fully revealed. No one chewed. No one spoke. Even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder, heavier, marking every second as if the whole room were suspended in time. The waitress stood tall, her sleeve pushed high, her arm a canvas of memory and sacrifice. The ink gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a mark of both sorrow and pride. And all around her, people stared, not at the millionaire, not at their meals, but at her. The millionaire shifted in his booth. He tugged at his collar, suddenly too tight, suddenly suffocating. He had always been the man who commanded the room, who silenced others with his wealth, but here he was drowning in silence. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of respect, and it wasn't for him. The respect, the awe, the reverence, it was all for the woman he had mocked. "Stop staring," he barked suddenly, his voice cracking under the weight of dozens of eyes. "You're all acting like this means something. It's just a tattoo. Just some ink." His hand waved frantically, desperate, but his words rang hollow. He could hear it himself. His voice no longer carried power, it carried panic. The waitress didn't flinch. She looked at him calmly, her gaze steady, her body unshaken. "It's not ink," she said softly, but the room heard her as if she shouted. "It's a promise. It's a life. It's a story carved into my skin so it will never be forgotten." Gasps rippled again. An old man near the counter removed his cap, holding it against his chest. A woman clutched her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. A young boy whispered, "Mom, what does it mean?" And his mother, her eyes full of tears, whispered back, "It means her father was a hero." The millionaire slammed his fist against the table, dishes rattling. "Hero? Don't make me laugh." His face twisted, red and desperate. "You think serving food with a sob story makes you noble? You think some dead soldier makes you more important than me? I've earned my place in this world. I've built empires, controlled markets, made men bow before me." He jabbed his finger at her, spittle flying with his words. "You are nothing. You'll always be nothing." But his words didn't echo like before. They fell flat, crushed under the weight of the room's disapproval. People no longer laughed at his cruelty. They glared. They frowned. Some even shook their heads in disgust. The trucker at the far booth muttered under his breath, "You've got no soul," and the old man who had spoken earlier raised his trembling voice again. "You sit there in your suit, thinking you're powerful," the old man said, pointing at him with a hand that trembled but did not falter. "But power without honor is nothing. Respect without humility is nothing. Money without love is nothing. And right now, you are nothing." His words cracked like a whip, slicing the last shred of dignity from the millionaire's posture. The millionaire's smirk faltered. His lips parted, but his tongue found no words. He looked around the diner, hoping for laughter, for agreement, for even one nod of support. But every pair of eyes burned against him like fire. The silence wasn't empty, it was judgment. The waitress stepped closer. Each step echoed louder than the last. The sound of her shoes on the tiled floor felt like a drumbeat of truth marching toward him. She stopped in front of his booth, towering over him though he sat slumped low, suddenly small. Her voice was calm, but her words cut deeper than any insult. "You think you know what it means to give?" she asked. "You think building walls of money around yourself is strength? My father gave his life so strangers could live. He gave his future so I could have one. That's sacrifice. That's power. That's love. And you'll never know what that feels like." She leaned closer, her eyes locking on his. "Because you've spent your life taking, not giving. And a man who only takes dies empty." The room collectively gasped. The millionaire's face paled, his arrogance stripped bare. His gold watch, once his prize display, caught the light again, but it no longer dazzled. It mocked him, a cold reminder that all his glitter meant nothing here. The silence grew unbearable. And then, one by one, people began to rise. The old man stood fully upright, removing his cap. The trucker followed, setting his mug down with deliberate care before standing tall. The young mother rose, clutching her child to her side. Soon, the entire diner was on its feet, a wall of silent respect surrounding the waitress. Not a word was spoken, but the message was clear: they stood with her. The millionaire was the only one still seated, the only one shrinking lower in his booth as though the walls themselves were closing in on him. His breathing quickened. He wiped at his forehead, his hand trembling. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out broken, hollow, pitiful. For the first time in his life, he was alone. Truly, utterly alone. The waitress did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply stood, her tattoo visible, her chin high, tears glistening in her eyes but refusing to fall. She didn't need victory, she already carried it. Her father's memory was her shield, her strength, her truth. Finally, the millionaire rose to his feet, but not with swagger. His shoulders were hunched, his head bowed. He clutched his briefcase like a lifeline, but even that seemed small now, laughably small compared to the weight of what he had just faced. He stumbled toward the door, his shoes echoing in the heavy silence. The jingle of the bell as he pushed it open sounded sharp, final, humiliating. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The door shut behind him, and for a long moment, no one moved. The diner remained frozen in reverence. Then slowly, one by one, people began to lower themselves back into their seats. But they didn't eat. They didn't chatter. They sat quietly, processing what they had just witnessed. A moment not of anger or violence, but of truth overpowering cruelty, dignity shattering arrogance, love eclipsing greed. The waitress wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then adjusted her sleeve back down. She picked up her tray again, as though nothing had happened. But everyone knew everything had happened. Her secret had been revealed, her father's story had been spoken into the world, and the diner would never be the same. One by one, customers came to her, not with applause, not with pity, but with quiet words of gratitude. The old man placed a trembling hand on hers and whispered, "Thank you for carrying his story." The trucker pressed a few crumpled bills into her hand, not as a tip, but as a gesture of respect. The young mother kissed her child's forehead and told her softly, "Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons." And though she smiled politely, her heart swelled with something deeper, peace. For the first time in years, she felt her father's presence not as pain, but as pride. The tattoo wasn't just a burden she carried, it was a flame, lighting the way not only for her, but for everyone who had witnessed this day. Outside, the millionaire stumbled into his luxury car, but even as the engine roared, he knew he couldn't drown out what had happened inside. The image of the tattoo burned in his mind. The silence of the diner echoed in his chest. And the word pitiful rang louder than all his riches combined. He drove away, but the humiliation would follow him forever. Back inside, the diner returned slowly to life. The clink of silverware resumed, conversations grew again, but it was different now. Every bite of food, every sip of coffee carried with it the memory of what they had seen. No one would ever forget the waitress with the tattoo, the millionaire's fall, and the silence that had made history inside four small walls. She continued serving, her steps steady, her smile soft. But everyone who looked at her now didn't see just a waitress. They saw a daughter of a hero. They saw resilience. They saw love etched into skin, stronger than money, stronger than pride, stronger than arrogance. And though she would never say it out loud, deep in her heart, she whispered, "This was for you, Dad."